all of my dreams will be nightmares too soon. Let them talk, let them think what they...
Mr. Farr.
So, are we more or less continuing in the same vein now, or are we trying to, we going to try to come to a rough formulation as to what direction to give staff?
Kind of all of the above.
All right.
You know, this is a real big issue, so let's try to develop some parameters if we can. If not...
Okay. First, I just didn't get to say this earlier, so let me say it now. The 2030 data, I don't know if we should worry about that, because things will be changing. You know, one of the things that we've chatted about, and I don't even know if it's feasible, but because this is an agricultural area, we've got Cathedral Oaks, we've got 101, and we've got Hollister, and if one goes down, the others are severely impacted, if not gridlock. I think we need to look into doing something with Cayo Real, and I don't know what the solution is with that, but it's too chopped up now. It looks like a discontinuous snake right now. So anyway, who's to say by 2030 what's going to happen? Somebody suggested maybe the university will eventually come around and give us an access out of South Goleta onto 217, because that would help a lot, and we could not dump so much onto Hollister. So anyway, the 2030 data doesn't scare me so much. When I looked at these, the presentations that you showed, the projections as to where these were going, it didn't look so bad. And again, if we were using 14,300, 18 may be somewhat problematic, but maybe if we used a higher number than 14.3, maybe some of those colors that we had on the graph, on the photos, maybe they wouldn't be the wrong color or as wrong a color. So one of the things that I would like to see, we didn't discuss, I don't think, the parameters of the two-lane alternative, but something from Kinman to the west. And some people have said run it to Fairview or run it to Orange. So that's kind of something that I would be interested in seeing. The parking's got to go full bore. It's obvious. Whatever our solution is, and this is not just to mollify the business community, but we want them to be happy. We want them to be prosperous. As someone has suggested, it might have been Eva Imbar. Somebody said, you know, you want people walking up your streets anyway. So you put them in a parking place where they have to walk 100 feet along a renovated, rejuvenated sidewalk with trees and actual places to sit, and the aforementioned outdoor cafes. I would love to see an outdoor cafe on Hollister. It would add so much charm to the area and be so cool. So anyway, the parking, we have to flog that regardless. I'm convinced. And the other thing, you know, if when we come back to this and you convince us that the two-lane is just not going to work, that the stars would have to be in an alignment that they never will have, and so we have to stick with the 4 lanes, I think we ought to look at getting the parking on both sides gone, so we could get the dedicated bike lanes. We could expand the sidewalks, look to modulating the center lane. In some places we put a landscape in, some places we move it, make it disappear so we can have sidewalks that can come out, and then we'll have some space to work with. So my bias on this is to take a closer look at the 2-lane on a limited portion of Hollister. Obviously, we're not going to be running it down to Kellogg because or 217. That would probably be a real mess. But a shortened version of that, Kinman to Fairview perhaps. And the thing that Mr. Werner mentioned on that too, I thought was a good idea, and I don't know whether this is feasible or not, this is coming from you guys, Could we put some sort of a plastic type barrier that would rough out what we expect, and not do it for a week? Let's try it for a month. Let's get an honest test as to what this would look like. And if the whole thing goes wrong, then we will know that perhaps that was pie in the sky and it would never work. Now, is it any sort of a test? Is that feasible?
I believe it's feasible. I would ask city attorney to chime in and see the legality of doing something like that. Because if you were to implement something that's not fully designed and you don't have your design immunities and everything worked out, you could be increasing the exposure to anything that were to happen because of that. When we do construction detours, those are typically planned, short duration, so it wouldn't be too unlike a construction detour. But this is a planned activity by the city. So I'll kick it over to Tim.
Well, since Steve covered the liability issues, with any of these things, the point is that you want to study it out before you take the shot. You don't want to just go out and implement some changes, because you can't anticipate what all of the impacts are going to be and what all the consequences are going to be. There's the liability issues. There's going to be tremendous enforcement issues. There's going to be some of the impacts that we've started to highlight with some of the things currently. And there's also some false expectations that you can get as well from putting in something that with a lot of cones or striping or something along those lines that's not there when you change them on a permanent basis, and all of a sudden, well, maybe it was the cones that made the difference, and now they're not there, and you don't know. So the both from state law, from a CEQA perspective, as well as just good prudence and engineering says, you do the analysis first, and you look at all of these things, and then from that knowledge that you can acquire, that's what you make your decisions based upon.
Well, so a certain amount of prudence is required before any action is taken, but the question is, how much would it cost to do the engineering on that and to make some sort of a reasonable application of the principle? It's a huge, the potential for change here would be absolutely huge if it could be proved that it was feasible. And if it was proven to be infeasible, then we certainly would have saved ourselves an enormous amount of grief.
Yeah, real quickly. It's not that the 2-lane is infeasible. It can be done. The question that the study raises and that we've discussed is at what cost? What are the impacts of the diversion? What's the delay? What's the operational impacts, basically, of taking the traffic that would be going through Goleta and shoving it elsewhere? That's the issue. It's not that it can't be done, it's infeasible. Well, it's if you're going to mitigate those offsite impacts, that's the question.
Yeah, well, but I think the way you characterize it may overstate the case against it a little much. That is, we may be forcing some people to find alternative routes. However, if the average daily trip is closer to 18,000 in an acceptable fashion, when you can move that many people through without creating chaos, then maybe that's something that we do need to take a closer look at. If we used 14.3 and it could take 18, maybe that would work. And maybe people would find other ways too, which would lessen the load and make it a feasible alternative.
Real quick, whether it's 14 or 18, that is really that's a metric by which you're going to compare throughput to. It could be any number. The actual impact, operational impact, is going to be more notice at the intersections and the other areas where the diversion occurs. So the 14 or 18, what you use there, that's just going to tell you whether or not you're in compliance on roadway ADT. It does nothing about the operational, the actual operational capacity or impacts associated with it.
But all of the projections as to the impact on all the intersections and the streets as far away as Patterson, all of those projections are based upon
No, they're
the
not.
backing up of.
But it's not to tie with the 14,000. The 14,000 is how many cars can you fit through a certain lane on a daily basis at an acceptable capacity. That's all that says. And whether you have a street that can handle more, say 18,000, like I mentioned, outer Hollister, or one that's less, that's downtown, it's just it's a benchmark that you look at to whether or not you're meeting acceptable capacity. It's the numbers, the actual diversion, or whatever it's going to be. The model estimates that, and then it calculates levels of service at the intersections and elsewhere. We'll tell you, in comparison to whatever number you pick, 14, 15, 16, 18, whatever the number is, whether you're meeting an acceptable capacity or not. That's all that is.
Well, is there no way around the problems that are printed here? Is there no way to institute, with your professional perspective on this, because you know a lot more about it than we do, do you see the two-lane alternative as pie in the sky?
I see the two-lane alternative as possibly creating impacts that will be very expensive to mitigate. The extent to which, the cost of which, that's what we really kind of have to dial down to. The question that's raised today, will reducing the length to somewhere around the community center to Orange, will that make a big difference? We can look at that. We can work with the stakeholders on all these assumptions. We can run the multimodal to really elevate and better explain the benefits associated with it. But at the end of the day, you've got a lot of trips that will either be waiting in line to go through or will be diverting and impacting somewhere else. And I don't think that will go away. That just doesn't go away. Mm-hmm. And not to the level even with mode shift, increased biking. I mean, you're talking literally thousands of vehicles potentially having to be, relocated, 100 here, 100 there, 100 there, to locations that don't have a lot of excess capacity. That's why it triggers these things, even after we have invested and done the improvements called for in the general plan. So I've heard Carmageddon, and I don't want to buy into that, but this is what that preliminary modeling effort has shown, that diversion will be significant. I don't know a way around that.
Carmageddon didn't happen, though.
Right.
I mean, it was the big deal. L.A. was going to melt down.
That's true.
And lo and behold, it didn't happen because the people paid attention and listened to what the people were telling them and found other routes.
We had people come up here during Carmageddon, and they loved it. They enjoyed Goleta during Carmageddon. See, they were noticed. They did not travel that day, right? They avoided that area.
Yeah, typically, yeah.
All right, let me bring you guys back. Let's talk about Goleta. Ms. Prody.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I want to thank everybody that came and spoke. It's exciting that we're finally talking about this again, and I really want to thank the Cal Poly students. I think they were the ones that got this conversation going again, and got us all excited and got everybody talking, and I think that's good. I'm really glad that happened. A lot of things that Councilmember Farr just said, were on my notes too. Were you reading my notes? But I have a few other questions that, it seems like the big issue here is peak hour. So has the city of Goleta entered into any other, conversation? Are we looking at any other ways to handle peak hour? Have we entered into any conversations with our airport and major employers, Chamber, MTD, and UCSB to really take a very strategic and broaden our outlook on how we're dealing with peak hour traffic? I've heard of other cities that deal with it by their hours of operation for businesses. They give incentives to to employers that offer maybe an employee can work one day at home, change the time of when it starts and ends. Can we look at MTD? Are they scheduling enough trips during peak hour? So there's enough, availability. I think what Councilmember Farr said was brilliant, and I don't know if this has been looked at already. Is Kai Real? Are we looking at that to extend it in both both at both ends? Maybe that's a conversation that has come up, and it's not a possibility, but I'm not aware of it, and I'm just wondering what's happening with that. So those are some of my questions. Are we doing anything more to look at how we can handle this peak hour traffic?
I think, first of all, we refer to peak hour, but actually we have several peaks during the day, depending on the location in the city. It can be the morning peak hours, people are going to school, dropping their kids off. It can be the lunchtime peak hour. It could be a Saturday noon, a weekend peak hour because of the shopping. Or it can be the evening peak hour. Generally, the evening peak hour still is a dominant for a majority of the areas, so we look at that. But we also look at the other peak hour activities also based on counts, and we may have to be modeling two different scenarios because your directional flow is totally different depending on the time of day. So your impacts are different. So as far as what we're doing, the city is not doing any comprehensive, proactive attempt to change commuter behavior. We do it typically as part of development review, and a lot of developments that are coming in, I think, get into that either by condition or by either mitigation to try to avoid peak. Employers are, because of the commute from down south and the peak spreading that's going on, that typically happens with employees that, we have employees that work at the city that they know they can sit in a car for 45 minutes if they leave at a certain time, or they can wait later and do that same commute in far less time. So the people will kind of do that on their own to avoid that crunch. But as far as the city, right now, as far as I know, there's no comprehensive outreach being done like that. If that's something the council wanted to do, that'd be a direction, a policy call, and a new program to implement. Okay.
Also, there's a question I had in the report. It suggested that a CEQA and an EIR would take anywhere from 18 to 30 months. Is that a typical amount? Is that what if a developer came in, say Target, or so would that be how long it would take, or is this? I don't know. I guess I'm wondering why so long. And is that the usual amount of time that it would take?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that number was, as I understand it, that number was come up in consultation with the planning department, but that is not unusual for the EIRs that we have seen. We've taken a number of efforts to try and streamline that with projects. And, as I said at the outset, too, what the process is going to be and what's involved in that process, all is driven by the project. Mm-hmm. And so the caution that was provided in the report for you this evening was some broad parameters, just to give you a ballpark idea, so that staff didn't mislead you into thinking that some ideas that would require environmental analysis could be done in a couple of months, or that some of these are much shorter than a multiple year analysis. Mm-hmm. But they're going to be determined based on once a project is identified and a design is developed, and then the analysis can be done on that and how many factors. But the CEQA process that we go through for every project does an initial checklist and goes through and looks at what are the impacts that are out there, and then goes through and does the analysis and study on those and the mitigation measures that need to be implemented. And there's a public vetting process, and all of that's involved. And that it's driven by the nature of the project that comes forward.
But when we discussed this earlier, we were asking you to look into AB 2245, and might that, I have it on some authority that will say that if you do a road diet, it is exempt from a CEQA process. So that might. You don't know that that's not true.
I hope you get your money's worth for that legal advice.
Do you know that that's not true?
I don't have a project to analyze. The
No, but
council,
can't you research 2245 and see if it specifically excludes road diets from its CEQA?
it does not specifically exclude road diets. No, it does not. Whether or not it is an exemption, it provides an exemption from the CEQA process, which means that it's a process to get there. When that exemption is selected, it has an alternative process, which could be nearly as involved. Its design is to avoid being as involved as an environmental impact report, but it still requires the same type of analysis. Remember, the purpose of CEQA is an informational document. It's to allow the decision makers to have information upon which to base a decision, so that you aren't forced into shooting from the hip in making decisions. You can make good, sound decisions based on information. And that exemption specifically provides that even if you elect to proceed under that you still have to have analysis done, information collected, that you still have to have an opportunity to have public hearing with the public and have them come in and participate in that. Whether or not that's going to be appropriate for any project, I'm not going to give a hypothetical legal opinion. When there's a project here, we're going to analyze it just like every project we have. If an exemption is appropriate, we will advise so.
Okay, but may I speak to the frustration that a lot of people feel when there's a desire to execute on a plan and we get held up potentially for 30 months by the state organization that's designed to examine the environmental quality impacts, when arguably you could say that there will not be a change. And I mean, can you understand that? Can you understand the frustration that people will feel with that? And here's more free legal advice, and it's probably worth what the first part was. But CEQA can be a little squishier than that, and you can choose not to. And I know the state regulations will spell this out, but there are ways. There are precedents for not instituting a CEQA report if it is deemed by all the participants, in this case those of us here, that the impacts would be negligible because we're dealing with the same volume in and out of Old Town.
There are provisions within CEQA, which are exemptions, which we're talking about, that you don't have to participate. You wouldn't have to go through that kind of study. Yes, those do exist. The applicability of those is governed by the CEQA document, or by the CEQA law. And we have used those in the past, and I'm sure we'll use those in the future when the circumstance of the project arises in which it's applicable, which the exemption is applicable. We do use those. We have, and we will again. I can appreciate the frustration, and as I mentioned, we've done a lot of work to try and pare down the effort. But I have not heard anything in the staff report that's been done. I don't rely on anything other than the staff report and frankly the testimony from everybody that came in today that would suggest that there's not going to be an impact. I think that when we look at this, there are impacts. The question is is whether or not those impacts trigger a certain level of study under CEQA.
Yeah, well, it's certainly not my intent to lay this at your doorstep because, you're trying to keep us out of trouble, and I understand that. If you can figure out a workaround on some of these things, or where you think we have an option to avoid the more intensive, time-consuming strategy,
In
that would be a good thing.
In every case, I'll provide advice both to the council and to staff. The decisions will be yours on a policy basis and staff's on an implementation basis to follow the advice. But I can't do that on hypothetical scenarios on the dais.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are we done with CEQA for now?
I don't know.
All right, I got a few questions and then a couple of comments. First of all, the report that you guys prepared today was incredible. I think any engineer would love this, but I'm not an engineer. And although it was easy read, it still left me kind of wanting as to understanding the impacts of the different options and the challenges. And your presentation tonight, Mr. Wagner, was excellent. And as I heard the presentation, we started with the GOTEC, where the county created a plan, but it didn't fit in the space, and so the county didn't do anything. And then we became a city to be able to get things done. And the first thing we did was create the general plan, and that's where the 2030 number comes up, and that is considering the build out of our city as determined by the general plan. So far, I'm okay. So it puts us in a very unique situation in that whatever we do is going to trigger a review of the analysis that was done upon the approval process of the general plan, CEQA, EIRs, etc. But we have a unique situation in Old Town, and it's unique because we're not like the benefits that are in Santa Barbara when you have multiple east-west streets. We don't have that. And so it eliminates a lot of options. Many of you that have been around for a while remember when State Street was 4 lanes. And they wanted wider sidewalks with their downtown organization, so they made it 2 streets. And then when they found out by making it 2 streets was that the cars weren't making it through the intersections on the allotted time with the traffic signals. So a lot of money was made when policemen would stand in the corner and write gridlock tickets because you can't block the intersection because it blocks the side streets. So we don't have the alternatives, the options of having a Chapala, Delavina, Castillo to have the east-west streets. So what I'm hearing tonight, though, from the people that are speaking about cars speeding, bicyclists, and we had one woman who was injured, I guess, by a bicyclist and skateboarders, is that there needs to be other alternatives to provide additional safety in Old Town. Part of it is enforcement to make sure that the vehicles and the pedestrians and the bicyclists are obeying the law. Secondly, that we further and aggressively look at parking alternatives and be able to take advantage of opportunities. Because, as you know, when you displace, you have to put it somewhere. And so we have to look at alternatives, and maybe that's the solution on some of these streets. The other thing is, we just repaved the Old Town, but now we need to reinforce the control measures, the red curbs. Many of them are faded to remind people that these aren't areas where you can park. And I think by doing that also provide additional level of safety. But I think we also need to continue the dialogue with what are the alternatives we can do, keeping in mind that this is going to be a long-term project. We should never stop talking about it. Just because the RDA went away, it doesn't mean we give up. It just means we identify what the needs are going to be and how much it's going to cost us. And then this council and the future councils need to commit to program enough monies to get the job done. But it's very frustrating that we already have a 2-year budget, but there isn't any money for the infrastructure in Old Town. That's why I'm saying this little stuff, the low-hanging fruit stuff, we can do at minimal cost, and then start looking at money set aside to assist with the parking situation, the parking lots. I do not agree with the 2 lanes. I mean, we have to have the 4 lanes. I mean, it's just, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. You have too many cars going down there. And until we solve the other issues, 2 lanes just not going to work. It's just going to, I mean, you can see what happens in Santa Barbara when they made it 4 lanes to 2 lanes. And without establishing an east-west, maybe when Equifowler's up, maybe the numbers will come down. Maybe we can try it. The whole idea of doing a temporary test, you can't do it. You can't do it because anytime you change the traffic configuration, you are assuming certain liability. I remember when I was first trained as a police officer, the first thing they taught you, maybe as a fireman also, is that how you set up the cones. Because the legal way to set it up, because if you set it up wrong and you cause an accident, guess who's in trouble? And where you put the barricades, where you put the cones, it's the same thing about how you create a street. So, and that's why you guys have all those letters after your name as engineers, and this is what you guys, live to do. But you got to have the tools to do it. So, those are my comments. Mr. Easton.
Without without the RDA, that's a very difficult phrase to really burn in because we've had it around for so long. So one of the parts of my aha moment when I perceived this whole thing of get the parking off the street. Streets are for moving on, and parking lots are for parking. Was that this is a program that we can do without an RDA and big money. We can budget for how much we want to expend in buying parking space or renting parking space in Old Town on the south side. We can work at that slowly or we can work at that quickly, depending on how much we want to budget. And it also allows us to proceed very incrementally on it. If people don't use those spaces once we've painted them and paved the parking lot, if it doesn't work, so we have either bought property which we can resell easily, or we're renting property and we can say, it didn't work. But it allows Goleta to proceed at a slow and a steady pace to get more space on the thoroughfare for all of the users that need it over time. I mean, I'm fascinated with how many people have recognized that this evening and said we need to deal with the parking. Even our mayor. Sir? the big solutions are going to be hard to come by without an RDA to fund them. But I think we can proceed. It's the same way we did with the storefront fix-ups that we did under the RDA, a little at a time, moving down the avenue. And one of the interesting things is that one of the merchants, I won't mention the name, has constructed parking that came about through the fix-up program that the RDA did, serving her business from behind, and it works pretty well. Anyway, I don't think it is the answer, but my golly, 10 years from now, when we can say we've produced all the parking you could ever dream of on the south side of Hollister, and so we are now opening that lane up to have a wider bike lane, or restriping so we get wider bike lanes on both sides. And that will be success, that we have plenty of space on Hollister. It isn't the only thing we need to work on in Old Town, but it certainly is a big thing. And I think everybody will support us. Even I got to have my parking. Well, that's a belief. And if it turns out that they can rent parking spaces to the city in back of their store and make more money on it than the customers that come off the street, who knows? We may get some enthusiasts talking it up and saying, hey, this is not a bad thing. So I don't dream of presenting the solution, but I think it is a solution and part of hopefully what will be, a multi-phased, small scale and affordable approach to Old Town. Plus, who knows? The City Hall, other small things that we can do and afford to turn Old Town into the center of the city.
Mr. Bennett.
Well, I'd like to start off also in thanking everyone who had appeared this evening and took the time to speak to us on this. It was a great evening with a great deal of input from a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different thoughts. And I think that part's pretty exciting. I'd also like to thank staff for the report that you put together. I think it's one of the best reports we've received from staff, and you weren't even sure what we were looking for. So I think from that standpoint, from my point of view, it was even better because I found it very informational, and I appreciated the detail. I thought that was great. That was really, really perfect. Might also, just as an aside, I too would like to see red curbs. Red?
Not pink.
Not pink, or practically non-existent. So I'll leave it at that. I'd like to start off by saying I think my biggest frustration, having gone back to the days when we had the charrette and sitting on the GOTAC, is we have such a reluctance to vision. And I have yet to figure that out. We don't have the money, so we can't vision. We can't think of the future. And yet, why do you plan? I find that incongruent, and it just drives me absolutely nuts. I don't think there's any question, in order to get for where we would like to go versus where we may start out, is going to be a phased approach, a phased project. Certainly the limitations of monetary resources to do what we'd like to do is smacking us in the face. I mean, let's be realistic. But it doesn't mean we can't do anything. I think we can do something sooner than later, not 30 months later. I'm not buying an EIR for 30 months from anybody. I don't care who's trying to sell it, because I'm not buying it. And I find it absolutely unconscionable to even suggest it would take 30 months for an EIR. But staff's looking for some direction, so let me throw out some ideas on what I'm thinking. I think that we need to get the bicyclists as safe as is humanly possible with the resources we've got and the resources we've got today. And I think that can be achieved through some restriping to accommodate the 4 lanes. The one compromise that I really appreciated staff came up with, and that was to just eliminate parking in the area where there are signalized intersections. Well, there's only 2, because we're not talking about Kellogg. We're talking about Rutherford, and we're talking about Pine. So that's confined. It's a small area to deal with and get the geometrics correct so you can go ahead and get the left turn lanes in. And in the case of Rutherford, there's only one left turn going left. Where Pine, it's all directions. So it would seem to me, and that type of a project we could move forward on in a very short period of time because it's doable. At the same time, because parking is so important for our businesses, that we embark on all the data that's been put together that I already talked about and approach the businesses because the parking that's available in those specific areas are available today. That doesn't mean that business people will welcome us with open arms, but let's try. Let's try to work out something with them, either on a rental basis, maybe on a long-term purchase basis, I don't know, whatever the possibility might be, so we can not only replace, but maybe improve the number of parking spaces that would be affected at those 2 intersections. Those are defined. To me, I think it's pretty simple. I don't know anything about the geometrics. That's where you folks come in, and that's why we pay you the big bucks, because you guys can engineer that stuff. I certainly can't. But I respect it and understand what you're telling us in that regard. We absolutely, I think it's unfortunate to suggest to the community we can reduce this down to 2 lanes today or tomorrow through restriping because of the impacts of the traffic. I think you did an excellent job showing us it's like squeezing a balloon. It's going to go elsewhere. It's not going to stop. And for that reason, I think it's just impractical. But it doesn't mean we stop there. It means that where those of us, and there were many who thought in terms of talking about a bypass road as an example, was realistic and should have been planned for, it's interesting. I wonder what might have happened if that actually had been adopted in '98 and it was in the plan and it had been there, given some of the opportunities we've had, like the Fairview Center, for example, as it went through a rebuild, and things became available in Old Town, ATK as an example, which actually I think we were able to work with them a bit when they added their 35,000 square feet. So I'm just saying, we don't stop there. We vision so that our ultimate goal, which is what I think staff needs to hear and we need to have in our general plan, is that someday Old Town Goleta is going to be a 2-lane road. That's the policy. So everything that we do drives that eventuality. It may take us 20 years to get to 2 lanes in Old Town. I don't know. It may only take us 5 or 10. Who's to say what revenues may be available in the future, or what ideas we may come up with, or what the community wants to support. We haven't even asked the community to say, once we figure out what it might cost and say, okay, it's going to cost X number of bucks, are you willing to consider paying for this so that we can accomplish this goal? I think that's something for the community to weigh in on too. And we haven't asked them that question. So I would like to see the short-term, what I believe the short-term solution, which will bring a degree of safety that bicyclists experience in Class 2 bikeways all over all the communities that have this kind of a traffic load. And staff's telling us that we can provide those safety factors that isn't perfect. It isn't the ideal having a 8-foot separated bikeway. I understand that, but gives them so much more than what they have today by working on those 2 signalized intersections and then working on the replacement parking and trying to get more parking than what we take away for that. And that's our first step. That's our first effort. And then come back with a more comprehensive discussion on how do we get to a two-lane Hollister Avenue in the future? What's it going to take? Maybe it's the extension of Gaviota from Fairview all the way through to Rutherford as a southern alternative to circulate traffic off of Hollister. I don't know. I'm still convinced the bypass, go back to working with the university. We started on that some time ago, kind of backed off. I don't think it's inappropriate to go hit that again and say, you know, folks, we really have an interest here. And we know what their concern is at grade. So we talk about something that's above grade, and we talk about some funding. We talk about access to funding that might be helpful working with the university in that regard. So that would be my suggestion. I very much sympathize with the bicycle and pedestrian community, but we got to start somewhere. I think we should start simple with a plan that I think is doable, but have a vision for the future for the ultimate plan. And that's my 2 cents worth.
Okay. We got a lot out here, but let's try to kind of bring it, put it in a box. The issues that the Mayor Pro Tem brought up, is that something that is workable? Is that something that staff can take direction on and come back to council with a plan?
We heard consistently about the parking all across the board. Start looking at parking. Just figure out how to use those lots, contact business owners, start doing that. The other recommendations were somewhat split. I see 2 supporting the 2-lane and 1 supporting the reduced center turn lane. So I'd like to hear, is there a consensus on Mr. Bennett's proposal, or, you know, where are we?
Well, let me weigh in on that one. Obviously, the current configuration doesn't support a 2-lane roadway. But if we look at the future is where we want to be, there are a lot of work that can be done in improving the safety and taking advantage of opportunities to get to there. But like I said, it could be 20 years. But in the meantime, we are actively looking at how to improve the Old Town situation. Can't do it right away. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I have to say that I support the 2-lane, and I'd like to get more information on how that would even be possible. I mean, for me, I'm looking at what do we want for this community? What do we want for Old Town community? How do we want it to look? Yes, a 4-lane with a stripe for the bikes, it would help. I would agree. If that's where we have to go, then that's better than nothing. But, you know, you're still going to have an issue with speeding. You still, I feel like, don't have that. When you bring the street down and you do things where it's not so wide and it is more pedestrian and bicycle friendly, you're going to create a more vibrant Old Town, and I thought that's kind of the direction that this council wanted to go, and I think we do, to make it the heart. You know, we keep hearing the heart of the city. We need a hub. Well, Old Town can be that. I just don't know how to get there. I personally would like more information on the 2-lane, some of the things that I mentioned that are missing, and also, like, how much would it cost to do that? You know, that's probably a big one. And you know, I even thought maybe this is unrealistic, but how much would it cost? And what would be the next step to getting there? What would we have to do? And then would we be able to set up a fund that, okay, we try it, we've done everything, it's not working. We have a fund, some money set aside, we're going to have to bring it back to the way it was and do a 4-lane. I don't know if that's possible, but that's kind of my vision for Old Town. So I think as far as the parking, I've read that parking study a few times, And I think that something that wasn't mentioned was enforcement. I mean, maybe some of the speakers mentioned it, but that's something that we're going to have to look at. You know, having worked down there a long time, I know a lot of those people need places to park that are employees, and they park on the street and they don't move, and they stay there. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed as well. I don't know if it's hiring somebody, setting up signs. I don't know how, but that's something I would like to see looked at, the enforcement in Old Town as far as parking restrictions. Maybe even a parking permits for residents. I don't know. That was mentioned in the parking study. So that's something that needs to be looked at. So I'm not opposed to 4 lanes if that's the only option that makes sense at this time, but I would definitely like more information on how might we make it possible to do a 2-lane and what that would look like.
Mr. Farr.
All right. Well, we are not of common mind here on this. And I suppose there's some humor in that, like anybody was expecting it, right? Okay, but for that reason, I would like to see us give you instruction to do 2 things. One would be to look at the 2-lane from Kinman to Orange and just see if there's any way through sleight of hand or some clever strategy you come up with to make that feasible. And 2, the 4-lane, if you convince us that thing's not going to fly, it won't work, it'll be a calamity in 7 different ways, then we look at the 4-lane. But looking at the 4-lane, I say lose the parking on both sides. We make a full bore effort, north and south, to accommodate the businesses. If I had a business along there and I thought I would be grievously injured by eliminating that parking, I would be upset. So let's find the parking. Let's have the arrangement with the private parking people to have public parking, and we will do what we can to bring it around, restripe it as well to get more parking out of it. And as you suggested, Rosemary, when we chatted about this before, make parking on 2 sides of one of the streets. Was it Orange? I can't remember. Yeah, and let's see if we can do that. Make it a one-way street. You could park on either side. There are a lot of spaces that could be gained that way, almost enough to take half a Hollister. Do one close to Mr. Unander's business, because Larry's is very dependent upon that. Maybe the lady who runs a little doghouse too, you know. Let's take a look to see where the greatest impacts are and see if we can find that parking. But get rid of the parking on Hollister. Let's clean that up. And maybe intermittently, let's take part of the center lane out and landscape it, perhaps, or use that extra space to bring the sidewalk out. If we did lose the parking on both sides, we could put the dedicated bike lanes, and we'd have some room for sidewalk expansion, particularly if we modulated the center lane. And then that goes back to the arguments that some have made that if in fact we do this and we make it a much more bicycle pedestrian friendly venue for people, that is going to be good for the businesses along there, because people will stroll. I've lived here most of the time since '77. As someone joked, I've never said, let's take a stroll down Hollister in Old Town, you know. But there are some very interesting businesses in there which you're just not aware of because it's not conducive to take that stroll, sit in a sidewalk cafe, have a cappuccino and watch the world go by. I mean, the enormous potential of Old Town is what's probably why we're all here and very excited about it. So I would like to see you guys take a closer look, if you would, to the 2-lane alternative from Kinman to Orange, perhaps. And if that doesn't work and you thought if you dropped off one more street, maybe we could do that even. At some point it becomes, you know, the elephant and the python, I suppose, and we don't want to do that. But consider that as an option, and then losing the parking on both sides, which of course means that we've got to go full bore to try to get that, and someone said maybe 2 to 1. For every one we take off Hollister, we provide 2 that are conveniently located to the business on the north and the south side. Oh, was it you that said it? Oh, okay. Why don't you speak next, Ed?
I think I said it because I saw it in the parking study, which was a revelation to me, which got me thinking outside the box. 2 versus 4, if we could have 2, that would be better than 4, but getting to it would seem to me to be a very difficult process. And if we can do everything else, I know streets that have four lanes that you can walk on. I mean, it doesn't have to be an awful place, and the speed limit can be 20 miles an hour and enforced. That 25 is done pretty thoroughly. But I think an organic approach, a small-scale approach, if we could do it fast, but I think fast means money, and I worry about money all the way. I think we're probably going to have to budget 2 years from now on ongoing, I don't know, $1.5 million a year for the next 10 years for Old Town. I don't know. We'll figure that out when it's time. But certainly we do need to at least know what the 2-lane version, what that cost is, both time and money. And we need to think about the enforcement part of it, because I think that is a big important part of approaching parking. And I've seen technology that just fascinates me. It lets you monitor parking through little things that are put in the pavement underneath the parking spaces, and in headquarters where the parking place is that has the guy that's got it 25 minutes over. And that's where you send your enforcement guy, and he bangs a $40 ticket. Pretty soon we get turnover. So as far as 2 and 4, find out so we can say here's what it goes to. But I'm not opposed to 2 lanes if we can afford it and if we can make the case. But somehow I don't think that's going to happen.
Mr. Wagner, could you return to council with preliminary estimates on what the different requests would cost to even consider, and help us make a decision that way? I mean, obviously, the minor stuff may not have a big cost on it, but the bigger stuff obviously will have significant cost. And that would help us, I think, in planning the future and allocating funds.
Yes, we can. This is a significant amount of work, even for the near term, and then starting to piece out the longer term 2-lane. And when I say significant effort, it's teams of consultants, it's several hundreds of thousands of dollars of design and effort, and we'll be coming back with estimates for. And then it's going to be a process of issuing RFPs or RFQs, selecting firms, coming to you for contract award. We've expended funds just to get to tonight that we're going to need to appropriate for and cover. So there's expenditures that we're going to need to be, or appropriations that are going to need to be made, since it's not included in the budget. But we can come back. It's going to take us a while to even pull together an estimate with some of the consultants we have on board to kind of get an idea order of magnitude costs. but we can come back with that. And then that would be a good opportunity, too, for us just to check in and confirm we're going in the right direction. I would ask, I heard parking enforcement now by a few, and that could be, personnel, new position, a contract position, even with the new tech. Is there a consensus for that? That was referenced in the report. It was because of the turnover issue and camping on the spot. So is there a
I think just an estimate of what it would cost to have a parking enforcement.
Okay, so include that.
Yeah. I mean, that's an easy one. Ms. Prody.
Also, will you be using, to look at the two-lane, the 2010 highway capacity manual? I mean, you used the 2000. Can we look at the 2010?
I think the big difference with the 2010 was the bike ped level of service. And this time we went out and got counts. We got counts on bikes and peds. And what I would like to do is find out if we don't have to throw away any work that we've done. If what you're looking for is that bike ped level of service, if we can do that part, we can get the information. Can we give you that? Do we have to redo the whole thing in 2010? Would it make that big a difference?
I guess for me, what I'm looking for is if the 2010 would help us get to where we might possibly want to go more so than the 2000.
No, it's not.
I
You're not
couldn't
going to get
access the 2010.
Yeah, it's not going to change the numbers significantly in terms of if the 2010. Are you thinking would it make the traffic results look better?
Would it be more favorable for pedestrians and bicyclists, and that way the counts, the numbers could be different? I'm not sure, because I've heard, I'm curious to why we wouldn't be using it. It's the newest one.
Well, let us take a look and look into that.
Okay.
If we can, we will.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. Are we good? And we do have money to take care of the pink curbs, though, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, sure, you get yours.
The mayor.
Let me just add my thank you to whatever you guys have done. This is a very difficult job with a very difficult situation and a lot of difficult people involved. So you've handled yourself very well, very professionally. You've nailed this from top to bottom. So thank you for that. And I hope I don't seem like I'm hectoring you in any way on this. We're just all trying to get to the same goal here. So thank you.
Okay, so we're done with that item, and we will move on to council comments. And who would like to go first? If there's no volunteers, I'll pick somebody.
I have no comments.